Hey there, my ghosty friends, welcome. So here's 12 tips to implement into your gameplay to improve your Final Fantasy XIV gameplay. These tips are for everyone of all skills, so let's get to it. Slide casting. Slide casting is taking advantage of how the server locks in your GCD cast, and then moving around during that time. This keeps you safe while keeping up time on your damage. Slide casting is completely free 24/7. You can slidecast by waiting about 70% through your cast bar, however, this may vary based on your internet and the ping you have to the server. Player's Hitbox. A player's hitbox is the invisible entity locked to your character that when detected with an area of damage, will cause damage to that player's HP. It may be invisible, but we can still estimate what it is and how we can use that information. Our character's hitbox is surprisingly pretty small compared to what our own character circle is. Our character circle is that circle you see under the character when you select them. Knowing that our character's hitbox is pretty small, we can get pretty near the edge of an AOE while still hitting the enemy. This is especially useful for any melee type fighter. Rolling your GCD. Rolling your GCD is the act of constantly spinning your GCD timer. Your GCD is your global cooldown, which are timers that prevent you from using your weapon skills and spells until the cooldown has been lifted. GCDs is your most consistent damage output to enemies, so this is why it is important to keep your GCD timer rolling. It is also good to keep it rolling because during boss fights, your GCD timers are actually in sync with the boss's casts. Granted, you started rolling your GCD timer when the boss's aggro was activated. This means safe slide casting and melee uptime. Weave slots. Weave slots are pie slice segments of your GCD timer that you can put off global cooldowns or abilities into. Weaving is the act of using your abilities in between your GCD timers. Most GCD timers will allow for 2 weave slots. However, this is also affected by ping. So sometimes GCD timers that should have 2 slots in them are actually 1, just because of high ping. Why 2 weave slots? Well, all animations have a small animation that must play through before another animation can happen. And if you play too many, or mistime some of them, this can lead to clipping your GCD timer. Clipping is the act of interrupting a timer, usually a GCD timer, to smoothly and constantly flow, but then restarting the timer back up. Weaving in 3 abilities will force this clipping. It is bad because now you have missed a potential additional X amount of casts later in the fight that you could have done had you not clipped. This is bad because less damage. It is also bad because now you're no longer synced up with your enemy's casts, which means you can no longer safely slide cast to avoid AoE damage. And it is also bad because now you are also out of sync with your team, with their buffs later in the fight, because you will need that extra X amount of seconds to set yourself back up for your burst. Raidbuffs and Bursts. So all jobs have bursts, but only few have raid buffs. Bursts are segments of time where your job has resources to use to dump large damage into the boss. This is a mixture of the use of job gauges or abilities. Raid buffs are abilities that will amp up the damage output for you and the rest of your team that receives them. For best effect, make sure to always use these all together. Raid buffs are critical moments for your team to slam the enemies like a truck with damage and further amp that up by doing all of your bursts in that window of raid buff time. This is why you'll notice other FF14 players suggest to learn your openers and rotations and practicing them on practice dummies. Because these openers and rotations are exactly this. Putting into muscle memory raid buffs being used together, and then bursting after setting up everything your job needs to during that window. Some jobs will burst more than others, and it's okay to go through with them, because all jobs will naturally join back together to burst during raid buffs. But do try, on some jobs that use their job gauge for damage, to save up as much as you can without overcapping your job gauge for the next upcoming raid buff window. Examples of raid buffs are Dragoon's Battle Litany, Scholar's Chain Stratagem, Dancer's Devilment, and so on. Examples of burst windows are the use of abilities like Monk's Riddle of Fire, Gunbreaker's No Mercy, even White Mage's Presence of Mind. Using ability healing first. This tip is for healers. There are so many tools that a healer has to heal the team without compromising their own damage. Your healing abilities. Use these first. Your GCD spell healing can wait for only if a team member has made a mistake and there's upcoming large damage, or you accidentally used too many abilities and not enough resources for the upcoming damage output onto the team. A healer's damage output is just as important as the rest of the team. You can go under the mindset that a defeated enemy is the best form of sustain for my team, because a defeated enemy can no longer cause damage that I need to heal. Using these abilities first can allow you to do two birds with one stone, keeping up the team, but also keeping up on the damage. Regeneration abilities are powerful, but they are slower to heal than GCD healing. This is okay because the boss usually takes a long while to smash on the team again anyway, which will have been recovered by then by the regens that you put on the team. Tanks helping with positionals. This is a tip for tanks. As a tank, part of your job is also to face the boss away from the team, usually looking north. It is also part of your job to make positionals as easy for your melee allies to execute. Positionals is a term for melee jobs that have to execute their weapon skills on a specific part of the boss in order to get the higher damage potency for that skill. If they miss that positional, then they lose that higher potency of damage for the same skill, therefore making the fight longer. They do have the ability True North, but they won't always have it. Or if they use it during a burst, it might misalign their skills and now they'll have to fight against muscle memory to continue using their abilities on time. Boss Timeline. So the boss timeline is a script that the boss will follow to give the players mechanics to overcome during the fight. However, because it's a script, this means it's also viable to prepare what you will use for each of its mechanics, and to use them consistently from fight to fight. Some bosses will mix it up and swap between two similar mechanics at times, but this is also viable to prepare. Whichever one it used, it will use the opposite variation of the same mechanic later on. This goes hand in hand with mitigation abilities that you have for your team. Or also times when to not use your raid buffs because you already know that the boss is running away very near when you are all about to burst on it. Avoiding AOEs and overlapping follow AOEs. There will be many times when there are AOE markers on the ground. AOEs are area of effect. These are the don't stand specifically here spots on the battlefield. These spots will show the players precisely where not to stand, so anything beyond that is safe. If a player completely abandons the area around the AoE, yes, they're safe, but they're also sacrificing so much damage they could be doing to the boss. These AoE markers are really the boss trying its hardest to interrupt you from hitting it. Don't give it that satisfaction. There will also be times when the boss places AoEs on you that follow you no matter where you go, and the range of them are indicated. These are usually also placed on your team at the same time. Same idea with these. Even if your AoE is touching another player's AoE, you'll be fine, just as long as your AoE is not touching the actual player. Touching these AoEs together will not combine their damage onto both players. Some bosses will even make these AoEs so big that this will be the only solution anyway, to place them on top of each other, but not on each player. Snapshotting AoEs. Snapshotting AoEs is a term that means when the cast bar of an AoE is full, that AoE will now snapshot, or take a picture of whoever is standing in that AoE, and deal damage to them. These AoEs, these spaces, are only unsafe when that happens. The animations from the actual attack mean nothing to that damage calculation. However, there are very few niches where the animation does actually line up with those snapshots. You can take advantage of this by slide casting out of it safely in time for it to snapshot. Granted, you are synced properly with the boss. Tank mitigation not only for tank busters. Tanks have lots of HP and defense, but that shouldn't stop you from mitigating even further from the auto attacks from the bosses. All tanks' defense abilities are completely free, which means there's almost no reason to not use them when you can. Just make sure that you will have enough defense mitigation for upcoming tank busters, or if you already used one prior, that it will at least catch the tail end of the duration of that mitigation on time with the tank buster. You will also notice that many cast bars for bosses will actually halt their auto attacks on you, so use that time to recharge on your mitigation tools instead. But then use it at the last second of the cast bar. Mitigating the damage before a tank buster means that the tank will have more HP to catch the incoming damage to safely heal up after. And there you go! I do hope that those tips help you on your improvement. Till next we meet, and be safe on your journey.